To what extent are monopolies caused by the government? And are monopolies necessarily a bad thing? By bad, I'm referring to how monopolies are negatively portrayed worldwide. And that's from Donnie.
Hey, Donnie, how you doing?
Hi, Stefan. Thanks for having me on the show. I've been watching you and listening to your podcast for a long time, and I never actually thought I'd be on one of them. So it's actually quite a privilege.
Well, welcome. I appreciate you being here. It's a great set of questions.
Yeah, thanks. So I wrote these.
Do you want to expand on the question? I don't want to just launch into a rant or anything. I have a little bit of bottled up young earth ranting in me, but I'm not going to do that topic. But do you want to expand on the question anymore? I don't want to sort of blow away your inclusion in the program with my rant.
Yeah, sure. So, I wrote a couple of questions a while back when I sent the email, and I remember writing this and wanting to talk about it because I was having a conversation with a friend from my economics class, and he was very adamant on the fact that monopolies are solely a product of the free market and that they need to be regulated by the government. But I told him that, there are natural monopolies that exist, definitely. I can give an example about, say, a railroad. It's very difficult to set up like a railroad company or an oil company, whereas it's relatively easy to get into, say, the restaurant industry, to set up a restaurant. So yeah, there are high barriers to entry for some industries, and some businesses do have better capital and resources. Fair enough, but at the same time, monopolies are also formed through government interference, through patents and protection laws, and just look at the prescription drug industry. So yeah, I'm basically just curious to see what your take is on monopolies.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating, this question of monopolies. I think generally to sell God, you have to have a devil, right? To sell subjugation to the good, you have to have a virulent and marauding evil that is going to take people down. And it seems to me that socialists invent these corporations, and I've got a whole series from years ago about how corporations are just kind of the new devil, sell you stuff, right? And to sell you protection from the state, what used to happen was the king would say, there's an evil king across the valley, and he wants to come and kill you and rape your women and impale your children on spikes, and so subjugate yourself to me because the bad king over there, blah, 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 right? And during a sort of time of relative peace in Europe, I have overstated this case before because I got some information from Ayn Rand that I never got around to triple checking, but there was the Franco-Prussian War and so on. But at least on the sort of western side of Europe, there was a relatively peaceful century from the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 to the beginning of the First World War in 1914. And during that time, you see the rise of the evil capitalist, right? So because there was relative peace and because there was prosperity, and the governments had taken a big blow in the 19th century, because governments always said, well, we're here to protect you and make your society better and so on. But then when they shrank the power of the state significantly, reined it in, the Corn Laws, the anti-tariff movements and so on, when they let the free market operate and the government shrank, society got a hell of a lot better. Like crazy, infinitely, wildly better than it had been at any other time in human history. So this is not good for the ruling class, right? It's not good for the ruling class that when they're reined in and constrained, society flourishes. Because then the next logical step is, well, let's keep reining and constraining these people until things get worse again. And if they had continued that process, we'd end up with a full-fledged voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist society, whatever. So, when your standard threat, the threat is twofold. A, there's an external enemy, and we got to protect you from them. And B, if you don't surrender to our power, there'll be disaster, chaos, the stereotypical Mad Max style anarchy. The 19th century took a big hammer to these two because restraining the state, restraining its power, more freedom of speech, increasing rights for women, more property rights, fewer tariffs, and so on, restraining the power of the state caused fewer wars, and there were fewer wars, and society got a hell of a lot better. So this is a big problem for the ruling class. So the ruling class needed to invent another demon to frighten the people with in order to control the people and have the people surrender their power to protect, right? And this happened to be corporations, robber barons, as we talked about in a show recently. Got to invent some new demon so that people will surrender their power to us to keep you safe. Ooh, bad things are out there. Surrender to me and I will keep you safe from the boogaloos just outside the firelight. Trust me, they're there and they'll come and take your soul. So give me some tax money and your children if I need to go to war and your women if I feel like it. And so this fear of monopolies was something that was created by the ruling classes, or the wannabe ruling classes, who were the socialists and communists, who actually became the ruling classes in many places around the world. And the socialists became more of the ruling class in the West, and the communists, of course, in China and Russia and other places. So, and the reason why it's so weird to me is that people are afraid of monopolies. People are afraid of monopolies. So they say, we need the state to protect us from possible economic monopolies. Ooh, we need the state to protect us from possible economic monopolies. To which one can only ask, is the state not a coercive monopoly? Is the state not a monopoly? If you're so scared of voluntary economic monopolies, why on earth would you run to the protection of a coercive political monopoly? If monopolies are so bad, why would you run to a violent monopoly to protect yourself? It's sort of like saying, well, there may be only one good-looking guy in town, so I want to get raped by an orc. I mean, it makes no sense. Okay, so maybe you won't get the one good-looking guy in town because he's got a monopoly on his handsomeness. But why on earth would you then want to substitute a voluntary monopoly, good-looking guy in town, with a coercive monopoly, being raped by an orc? Orked by a rape, I don't know. So it makes no sense logically, even remotely. Because, and so people talk about, well, there's natural monopolies. Well, there are two kinds of natural monopolies. The ones that are risky and the ones that suck. And those are really, really important. So the ones that suck we'll start with first. These are natural monopolies. So there's a town, let's say, God, there's some of the towns that I worked in when I was working up north when I was in my teens, right? And there are towns of like 200 people or 100 people or whatever, right? And in that town is a dingy, crappy, dusty, only early 70s music on a non-working jukebox, crappy bar. Crappy bar. And it has a monopoly because there's not enough business for two bars. So there's one bar and it's barely scraping by. So it has a monopoly. But that monopoly is controlled by social pressure because the guy who runs the bar lives in the town, right? It's not a town with like another town a kilometer or a mile away, because then it's competing with the bar in the other town, right? So in the country, you got to drive everywhere, right? So let's say that there's no other bars for like 30 miles around. It says one bar, this dive in this town. Okay, so because the other towns are so far away, the guy who runs the bar lives in the town, grew up in the town, his friends are in the town, his social circle is in the town, his kids play with the other kids in the town, he's part of the Rotary Club, he's embedded in the town, whatever, right? And so he's not going to start jacking up the price of beer because he knows everyone and they'll hate him for it and they'll ostracize him and they'll say you're a jerk and you're an asshole, and right? So he's got a monopoly, and his monopoly sucks because it's barely enough for him to scrape by on, and he can't raise his prices because he's embedded in the social environment. Or maybe he's got the grocery store or something like that, right? And this is what people say. There's some town in the middle of nowhere, and there's a guy with a grocery store, and he's going to jack up the price of groceries, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. Okay, well, he's living in the town, isn't he? I mean, he's not going to be able to jack up the prices because he's going to be ostracized socially, which is social ostracism produces the same biochemical reaction as torture for human beings, because we're social animals. We need each other to survive and thrive, particularly raise our kids, guard us while we sleep, the whole deal. And so that's the monopoly that sucks, right? And there aren't that many of them. And let's say that the guy does decide to jack up the prices in his grocery store. Maybe you can say the bar, you don't go to the bar or whatever. Okay, well, the people there are already paying very little for their housing because nobody wants to live there, right? I mean, nobody wants to live in these out-of-the-way places. I mean, people just generally get born there and IQs are too low to leave, whatever, right? So, okay, so they're paying, I don't know, 5% or 10% for their housing compared to a big city. Okay, so they've got a little bit of money left over for their groceries. So if the price goes up a little bit, that's all right. And of course, if the price goes up too much, then people will ostracize the guy, or people will ship groceries in from elsewhere. It'll just create a demand, right? And so all people can move. If he triples the price of groceries, okay, well, I'll just move one town over or whatever with some friends, and the guy's going to be out of business. So there's those monopolies that suck. Now, there are other monopolies, like you say, okay, well, a railroad, right? But a railroad is not a monopoly. A railroad is only a monopoly on that rail. That's it. That rail is the only monopoly they have. Because having a monopoly on a railroad doesn't matter that much, because you still don't have a monopoly on people moving around, right? Because they can drive. Ooh, look, there are roads as well, and so on, right? So you don't have the kind of monopoly that you think about. He's got a monopoly on his railroad, and then people got bicycles, and there are helicopters, and there are cars, and whatever, right? And, of course, people can boycott as well, right? I mean, people can just say, I'm not going to buy anything until you lower your prices or do anything more reasonable or anything like that. And so there are the monopolies that occur because nobody else wants to bother to compete with you. And there are the monopolies that occur because you've invested in a railroad, but they don't have a monopoly then on people moving. And, of course, if you jack up your rates too much, then people will simply stop traveling on your railroad. And this can, of course, even cause people, like entire towns to shut down. Like when the mine is exhausted, everyone just moves away. And if you've got a railroad going to a town and you start saying, I'm going to charge 10 times as much, well, people will drive or people will move, and you'll destroy the value of your railroad in pursuit of short-term profit, and everyone will hate you. And your shareholders will sue you for destroying the value of their business, right? No, you want to make a decent, comfortable profit. You don't want to make so much profit that you invite in alternatives or you invite in other competitors and so on. You don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So the only way that people can really get profits, monopoly profits, the rent seeking. There's an old statement from Adam Smith that says people of the same industry almost never get together except their gathering results in some conspiracy against the public, right? So let's just take the example of there's 5 people who make computer chips, right? I don't know, Qualcomm, AMD, Intel, Google, I think, is making some now too. So a bunch of guys get together and they want to create a monopoly. And they say, we're all going to double our prices for computer chips, right? Well, that's really, really tough because everyone might be nodding there and, oh, yeah, absolutely. But of course, you have to keep it quiet. You have to keep it secret. In a free society, you'd still have to keep it secret because you don't want to really annoy your customers, so they'll go overseas to get their chips because they don't trust you anymore or whatever. But here's the problem. Let's say everyone except one person, like every company except one company, doubles the price of their computer chips, right? Or let's say they all double the price of their computer chips, and then 3 weeks later, one of them goes back to the regular price, right? Well, their market share is going to expand enormously. They will be economically very well rewarded for breaking the cartel, right? They will be rewarded with massive gains in their market share by breaking the cartel. This uncertainty is why these cartels don't work in the free market and never have historically worked. Of course, people all try and get together. All the bread makers will get together and try and raise the price of bread. But the first guy to break that makes a fortune. He is well paid, well compensated for breaking with the monopoly. And so the fact that these contracts can't really be enforced, the fact that you don't ever want to have a formal contract, even in a free society, for fear of annoying your audience, then that means that these voluntary cartels don't work in the free market because the incentive to break them is too high. So then what do the people who want these cartels do? Well, they go to the government. And they say to the government, we need you to limit foreign competition. We need to limit barriers to, we need you to raise barriers to entry. We need you to raise tariffs. We need to keep foreign products out. We need to make it really difficult to get into our business. And then we're going to give you a whole bunch of political donations if you allow us to set minimum prices or something like, or just create the conditions by which minimum prices can be established. So, 100 years ago, there was a huge crisis in healthcare because it was too cheap for the doctors. They weren't making enough money because too many other people were offering these kinds of healthcare options that only the doctors felt that they should be able to offer. There were midwives and other people and so on, snake oil salesmen to varying degrees of quality. So they ran to the government and said, well, there's a lot of bad doctors out there, a lot of, thumbscrew McDucks who are just hacking people open, unscrupulous saw doctors and so on, right? And so the government said, okay, fine, well, we'll make it a license requirement, and then they restrict, right? So first you've got to be a license to practice medicine, and then they restrict the number of people they'll give licenses to, and then they sort of expanded, they banned midwives, and then they through Congress after the Second World War, they got the right to exclusively write prescriptions to give medicines. They took it away from pharmacists and other people and so on. And then, of course, they like the fact that the government mandates all of these healthcare initiatives and commandments, and you've got to have this included in your healthcare plan and your insurance. And then they like the fact that the insurance has gone through because you weren't allowed to give people raises in the Second World War. The companies just paid healthcare insurance, which took it off the table in terms of personal negotiation, which means they can jack up the prices. You just go on and on and on. And so now you have this cartel called doctors, just as you have cartels called plumbers, just as you have electricians, just as you have cartels called lawyers, and so on. And all of these are monopolies, but they're not products of the free market, right? So first of all, again, just to sum it all up, first of all, say to the guy, if monopolies are a problem, what the hell do you think the government is? Secondly, who cares about natural monopolies that are occurring because nobody else wants to compete? Who cares? Or it's a tiny segment of human society which is easily escapable. Just go somewhere else or find an alternative. Monopolies like railways are not monopolies on travel, right? So they have to compete with all other forms of travel, which means they're going to keep their prices down. Social ostracism for people who gouge others is a very powerful way. Shareholders who wish to maintain the value of their company will prevent overcharging because it destroys the value of the company in the long run. And last but not least, of course, people will try and set up cartels, but the economic rewards of breaking the cartel is always why they never last in a free market, which is why everyone runs to the government to create monopolies. It is not the government who will protect you from monopolies. Government is the only way monopolies can last. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. So, just to summarize, monopolies and businesses in general are just as afraid of ostracization as competition, right? And that's just as impactful. Is that what you're saying? From one of your earlier.
Oh, yeah, listen, if you're running the only bar in town and you triple the prices of drinks, people will be really upset with you. And they will let you know. Because the only way you have a natural monopoly is it's a very small, secluded community, which means you're even more dependent on your social life, which means you don't really want to annoy everyone around you. And people's lack of faith. It's funny, people on the left have this lack of faith in horizontal enforcement of rules, and then they use political correctness and screams of racism, war on women, misogyny, Islamophobic and all to enforce their dictates. I mean, people on the left don't like the spontaneous self-organization of a horizontally enforced society, but that's exactly how they enforce their edicts, is through horizontal condemnation and criticism. I'm not saying I want the entire world to turn into the left, but it's just kind of ironic that the left needs government, but enforces most of its edicts through all voluntary and generally pretty slanderous mechanisms, if that makes sense.
No, definitely, yeah. So I'd just like to move on to the next question I have, which is...
Okay, it's got to be quick because I've been doing this for 3 hours and 40 minutes, so let's keep this one quick.
Yeah, round 3. I don't know how you do it for this long. But next question, do you think...
Catheter. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think a return to the gold standard will happen? And if so, do you think it'll happen within our lifetimes, or do you think the exact opposite is going to happen, and it's just going to like in the past, be made illegal.
Donnie, I love you. I just wanted to say that right up front. For the fact that you would say our lifetimes, given how young you are, that's a beautiful thing. Mwah. Big, giant, hoary-headed, spotty air kiss. Well, something's going to replace fiat currency, and for sure, in our lifetimes, something is going to have to replace fiat currency. That having been said, if there's some massive advancement in human technology, like everyone gets a portable thorium reactor that they can strap to their ass and jet ski around the planet and creates. I mean, if there's some 20th century motor company get electricity from the static in the air thing that happened in Atlas Shrugged, if something like that happens, it'll extend the lifetime of this predatory system longer, just as computers have kept the system going where it normally would have crashed by now. So there could be some thing that happens. But, if trends continue, and certainly innovation in many ways is declining, if trends continue, it will be replaced by something. I'm not a huge fan of the gold standard relative to some cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and so on. But that's, obviously kind of quite a bit of guesstimation. It will have to take a crash. I mean, we're too far to have this institute in any legal fashion. So it'll take a crash, and then they'll try and rebuild from the rubble, just as they have many times in the past, and hopefully they won't many times to come. But yes, certainly something will replace this dying system, and it will be something more limited. And then, of course, all the chiseling, grabby, narcissistic weasel bags will start trying to get fiat currency back up so they can steal in the unseen way. But, we'll continue to fight the good fight, or at least I will, until they put me in the ground.
Right. What advantages do you think Bitcoin has and other cryptocurrencies have over gold and, silver and other commodities?
Well, it's the same advantages that emails have over physical mail. I mean, it's just electrons, and therefore it's much more efficient. It doesn't require storage costs. It doesn't require transmission costs like movement costs and so on. At least they're much, much lower. And and I've got the Truth About Bitcoin presentation. I also did a debate some years ago with our good friend Peter Schiff on Bitcoin versus gold. So I won't go into all the details about that because I won't be able to reproduce everything I remembered from back then, or at least knew back then. But there are advantages. That doesn't mean, of course, in a free society, you can have both standards. You can have neither. It could be something else, right? It could be currency relegated to my last few straggling hairs and the count thereof. I mean, whatever is going to be most efficient will be worked out by the free market. There will be advantages to Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, and there will be advantages to gold, and they will all complement each other, and society will allocate resources in their most efficient and productive and long-term sustainability format. And the retention of value is the most essential aspect of currency. I mean, if you know what your currency is going to be worth in 5 years, that takes a massive amount of risk out of your economic calculations. Right now, economic calculations are just playing darts in a whirlwind while blindfolded. I mean, nobody knows what the hell money is going to be worth in 6 months or 3 months, let alone 6 years or 3 decades. Yet people are signing contracts for, 10, 20 or 30 years in terms of long-term mortgages even. And what the free market would need to deliver the most is to reduce the amount of uncertainty in economic calculations, would be to provide a currency that retains its stability over time. And that, of course, has been traditionally occupied by gold, but there are lots of other electronic mechanisms that could do the same thing in many ways. So that would be my guess.
Right. Of course, I guess as long as there's no institute out there that can produce more of the currency, I guess that's the most important part of the next.
Right. And that's baked into Bitcoin, right? That it's going to go after 21 million and change and then stop. But it's pretty much virtually infinitely divisible. You can divide Bitcoins up to as many pennies as there are in all the currencies in the world. So it is very divisible. And of course, Bitcoin being the internet of currency is not just the Bitcoins themselves. It's also a whole programming environment and triggering environment, and you can store deeds and you can have certain events occur when other events occur. And it's a whole, Bitcoin to gold is the same relationship as the internet to a book. Not only is it non-physical, but it is infinitely extensible and programmable. And so it has that value as well. So, but anyway, I've got tons of stuff on Bitcoin and people can have a look at that kind of stuff. But it's fantastic that there's something so optimal to replace what can't last. And I'm very excited about that.
Right. Okay. Last question. What's your overall gut prediction, I guess, for the global economy within the next 2 or 3 decades? Because I mean, there's a ton of news, economic news.
Okay, Donnie, that's a great question. I got to tell you, here's where our love affair must come to a crashing end. That is such a big question. I can't do it justice
Right.
after 3 hours and 48 minutes or whatever. So I will send that question in by email, and I'll do something on it. But I can't give you something good right now. I can't hit the high notes after so much singing. So it's a great question, but I'm going to have to give you an annoying rain check on that, if that's all right.
No, sure, I understand. I mean, you've been doing this for almost 4 hours, so it's kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It's not easy.
All right. Well, listen, thanks everyone so much, of course, as always, for a very, very enjoyable show. And I really, really appreciate the variety and interest and fascination that I have with everyone's stories. Is something that I have yet to reach the edge of in terms of my interest. So I really, really appreciate everyone who calls in to keep the show interesting. And thanks, of course, to the donors, freedomainradio.com/donate. To help us out, if you're going to do some shopping, fdrurl.com/Amazon to give us a little tickle on the affiliate links. Doesn't cost you anything and throws a few bits our way. Thanks, everyone, so much. Have yourself a wonderful, wonderful week. Check out the Hillary Clinton video that I just put out on her email scandal, which I think is very good and hopefully instructive. And like, share, and subscribe as usual. Have a great week. Mwah! Talk to you soon.